What if I told you that the Toronto Raptors' biggest X factor going to next season was not Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby, or Pascal Siakam? What if I told you that the player that I'm talking about was so bad last season that Crafted's plus-minus model had him as a 12th percentile offensive player among rotation players in the NBA? That he had a below-average PER, a below-average true shooting percentage, three-point percentage, free throw percentage, and that he barely started last year? What if I told you that this player was so unheralded that there's not a single list that I know of that sees him as a top 100 player in the NBA or a top 30 young player in the NBA? What if I told you that I myself was screaming for half the season to have him sent down to the G League as he made one boneheaded play after the next? And what if I told you right now that I was wrong? Let's talk about this player in today's Raptor Breakdown. If you're new around here, my name is Robert, this is Pensare Basketball. As always, grab your coffee, hit the subscribe button, and let's get to it. So some of you have probably guessed by now, the player that I'm talking about is Precious Achiuwa. And of course, I will concede that if you are a casual NBA fan who did not watch Raptor games last year, you're probably coming here, you're going to Google his stats really quickly, and you're going to tell me I'm crazy because the numbers are absolutely depressing. We're going to provide some context to those numbers. We're going to talk about the influence and role that Nick Nurse and his teammates have had. We're going to talk about how he moves. We're going to talk about that potential. What is the top end potential for what a player like Precious Achiuwa can be? So let's get to it. Yes, on the season, 50% true shooting for a big. In a vacuum, if I just told you that there was a young big in his second year, not as a rookie, but in his second year who had a 50% true shooting, you would probably think that that player was offensively inept. But I do want to say that after the All-Star break, we saw a very different Precious Achiuwa. This is probably why sometimes analytics and stats require context. If you watched Precious Achiuwa in the beginning of the season, you knew that he was doing things that he had either never done before, especially at an NBA level, and probably was not equipped to do. However, riding out those mistakes was a gamble by Nick Nurse, and that gamble paid off very quickly. There was a story where Masai Ujiri, probably his most enthusiastic supporter in the Raptors organization, went up to Nick Nurse after about 10 games and said, "What's wrong with this guy? What are you doing?" And Nick Nurse had to sort of say, hey, there's a longer term vision with this guy, and this is why I love Nick Nurse. He's always thinking development, and what he did for Precious Achiuwa, enabling him to run the break and bring the ball up the court. This is not the Precious Achiuwa that we saw in the Miami Heat. First of all, the three-point shooting, it was night and day. In the first half of the season, it was like 30%, which is not bad for a big, but definitely below league average. And the attempts, it was like 1.2 attempts per game. In the second half of the season, he jumped those attempts by over 300% and raised his percentages by almost 10%. He was a 39% three-point shooter after the All-Star break. I implore you to find a single player in the NBA who made that type of leap mid-season. Leave it in the comments below. Let me know if there was another player. I haven't found them. Let me know. That was a seismic leap. What we saw in the playoffs was at times the most versatile defender on the Raptors. And that's saying a lot, that for a guy to be on a team with Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby, and Pascal Siakam, for him to stand out as possibly the most impressive. I'm not saying best, I'm saying most impressive, because that's the thing we need to realize with young players is it comes and goes in spurts. So let's talk about that development curve, because there's something that happened in the world around 2020 March-ish, and while it impacted every single young player in the NBA, including Scottie Barnes, including Pascal Siakam, it impacted all of us. But I think that there's one class that was particularly impacted by that event, and I think it's Precious Achiuwa's class. And there's a lot of prospects that not only had to deal with, Precious Achiuwa didn't have a training camp, much like Malachi Flynn didn't, and he ends up on a team like the Miami Heat, which is all win now. I think he just kind of got lost in the shuffle. I mean, there's a lot of players ahead of him, and I don't disagree that they were probably right for playing Dwayne Dedmon ahead of him. Dwayne Dedmon's a hell of a backup big, but the Raptors did end up getting a guy who for 2 years had sort of had his development curve undercut. And I think what we're seeing in the rapid development from the first half of the season to the second half of the season last year was that somehow Nick Nurse has re-sparked the engine. Next, let's talk about how he moves. Achiuwa gets a free. I think that this is a fascinating topic that does not get enough credit for determining how good a player is going to be. If you watch Dwayne Wade at Marquette, you knew that he was going to be really good. And that has a lot to do with just how he moves around the basketball court. You know, Bill Laimbeer did not move like Shaquille O'Neal, and Isaiah Thomas did not move like Allen Iverson. But his combination of size, force, agility, flexibility, hip mobility, everything about how Precious Achiuwa moves is effortless and powerful. And what you end up having more and more with a player like that is that when the decision making starts to catch up to the athleticism, you start to get an unstoppable force. I remember having a debate with somebody about Anthony Edwards versus LaMelo Ball, and this was around their rookie season. And I remained pretty steadfast that Anthony Edwards was going to be a way better player, but the stats did not back it up. And for those of you who follow this channel, you might assume that I'm some analytics nerd that just doesn't watch the game ever, and I've heard that comment several times in the comments section, sometimes when I use analytics to dismiss a player. And I gotta tell you, I believe in the eye test a lot. And one of the major things that I look for is how do you move? Precious Achiuwa is by far the best athlete on the Toronto Raptors. And the more and more I looked at him and the more I saw it, and even though it would only happen about 2 times a game where he had a clear path to the basket or he just happened to blow by a player or get lucky on a crossover, you would start to see that this guy could be a force of nature in the open court. More so than Scottie, more so than even Pascal. And those are both incredible transition players. So I think that the way he moves is a huge advantage going forward, especially because I think that over the last 12 months, his decision making and his feel for the game have improved exponentially. Now, that might sound absolutely insane, given everything that I said about his statistical profile, but I'm telling you that everything that you liked about Pascal Siakam when he was as old as Precious Achiuwa is ahead of him at that, okay? He's more athletic, he's stronger, he's a way better shooter already, he's a better ball handler than Siakam was at the same age. I'm telling you, Precious Achiuwa at a younger age is ahead of where Pascal Siakam was, and they're very similar players. I think the advantage, however, that we haven't talked about yet is on defense, where I think Precious Achiuwa has first team All-NBA defender written all over him. So the offense, which we've talked about, the movement, the ball handling, the decision making, the passing, some of those errant passes that were going into the third row, they're not going to the third row anymore. And that's all gravy. But what this guy can do for you defensively is legitimately switch 1 through 5. There aren't 10 players in the league who can do that, and the Raptors happen to be lucky because they have 2 or 3 of them, and he's one of them. He can legitimately guard centers, power forwards, and switch on to point guards. He's not a prolific shot blocker, and he's probably never going to become one, but he can provide some serious resistance at the rim, and he can switch out to really quick players on the perimeter and really check them. And we saw it last year in the playoffs. We have seen Precious Achiuwa in spurts, check some of the quickest and some of the biggest players in the NBA and hold up pretty admirably. Last year, despite the fact that he was only in his second year and he was adjusting to a new system and he had all these growing pains, Crafted already has him as a 73rd percentile defender. Where could that go this year? I think it could easily jump to 90th. He could be so good on defense, it's almost mind-boggling. I think he could be a top 25 player at some point down the line if he really wants to be. I think it's a great thing that the Raptors have him under rookie contract for the next 2 years. I see no reason why the Raptors should ever move off of him and not extend him at whatever dollar amount he needs on his next contract. I see a guy who's relentlessly chasing greatness, and I see no reason why he wouldn't achieve it. I see physical gifts that 99.9% of the league would be lucky to have. To everybody out there who thinks that I just have cemented my view on Pascal Siakam or Fred VanVleet, because I did read the comments in the last video, and some people felt that I was being unfairly harsh to certain players. And maybe in the past I've been accused of being a little too stubborn by my therapist, by my mom, by my dad. Okay, yeah, I'm a little bit stubborn. I don't think I've ever changed my mind completely about a player the way that I have about Precious Achiuwa, because I'm not blind. I'm looking, I'm watching, I'm seeing. And what I'm seeing is a player that doesn't come around very often. I see a player who has a quickly developing handle that makes his already lethal first step almost unguardable. I see a shot that is going to open up the rest of his game, and I see him in transition filling lanes in a way that I didn't see 12 months ago. I think Precious Achiuwa is incredible, and that's why I think that he's the X factor for the Raptors going forward. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Let me know in the comments below if you think that I'm being too high on Precious. What do you think he's going to average this year? Do you think he should be starting over Gary Trent Jr. or somebody else? Let me know that. Am I being too high on this whole maybe top 25 top end potential? Maybe there's something I'm missing about him that you see that I don't see. Let me know in the comments below. We're going to be releasing 2 videos this week, top 5 most underrated teams and top 5 most overrated teams. There's a lot of, previously injured players coming back, some older stars aging out, some young players emerging, and I think that the league's landscape is changing a lot. And I do want to talk about some other teams other than the Toronto Raptors on this channel, and I think those videos are going to give me an excellent chance to do that. Also, I do want to say that this weekend I want to do a mailbag episode, so if you have a question that you'd like me to answer, let me know below by typing mailbag ... and then type your question out, and whatever your question is, whether it's about player rankings, the Eastern Conference, another team in the East, or the Toronto Raptors specifically, coaching, roster related, future related, trades related, let me know and I will make sure to answer that question. Thank you for sticking it out. If you haven't hit subscribe, hit notifications. See you next time. Bye.